Hello and welcome to A Gentle Healing Journey. My name is Rain Francis, and on this channel I talk about how to deal with life's struggles and challenges. This video is part of my series about why we stay in emotionally abusive relationships. But of course, this could apply to any type of abusive situation. Today I'm going to talk about the seventh reason why we stay: isolation. Now, isolation is when an abusive partner uses manipulation to cut off their partner's support system. And as with all other types of abusive and manipulative tactics, it's about maintaining control over the victim, making it harder for that person to leave the abusive relationship. Isolation can fall into a few categories: physical isolation and emotional isolation. Why don't we start with physical isolation? Physical isolation is exactly what it sounds like: isolating someone physically away from all external support systems and maybe even society in general. I can speak personally about being manipulated into isolation in many ways, and physical isolation was one of the tactics that was attempted but not successful. When I decided I wanted to buy my home, the criteria was simple for me: good location, affordable price, and a livable dwelling. Another big criteria for me was that I wanted to be able to walk my dogs out my door. Where I had been currently renting in Quebec, there was a problem with some people who left their dogs loose a lot of the times, so that anytime I walked my own dogs, those loose dogs would run up and try to start fights with mine. It became something that I couldn't physically control, I ended up putting the dogs into my car and driving them to a faraway trail to walk them every day. I didn't want to have to do that anymore. I remember when I was going through the realtor ad for this house, my late husband always made comments that it wasn't far enough away from humanity. He wanted to be so far away from other people that we would never bump into anyone ever. At this time, this seemed ideal to me because I'm the type of person who likes to be alone. I like to have my land around me. I don't like to hear neighbors on my wall or making noise late at night. But let's face it, if you happen to find a place like that, can you really afford it? It's probably going to be a little shack in the woods. So he was never satisfied with the properties that I showed him. He complained about all of them for some reason or another, saying that he would never be happy at any of these properties. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. If you're not happy, don't come with me, right? Well, this was at a time in the relationship where I was very susceptible to manipulation. I'd been worn down for years by emotional and verbal abuse, and I just wanted to make him happy. I wanted to make me happy, but I wanted to make him happy because in the back of my mind, I thought that if he was finally happy, he would stop being abusive. That's how I was living. Anyway, all of his complaints made a big impact on me, and I think I went through thousands of realtor ads. Nothing was good enough. In hindsight, of course, nothing would ever have been good enough. But finally, after 3 years of looking and making offers and being outbid, I found this place here where I live right now, my home. It was just when COVID had started and the real estate market was tanking. I could afford the down payment on this house, and in my eyes, it was very rural, very quiet, very far away from other neighbors. Now, of course, I'm not isolated in the woods, but my closest neighbor is about a kilometer away. I see people often, but not every day. There's a cottage right next door, maybe about 200 feet away, but those people only use it for a couple of weeks in the fall during hunting season. Otherwise, I really have no neighbors. And I remember when I was looking through the photos and talking to the realtor about it, this property, my late husband started making the same complaints, that there was a cottage way too close, that we were too close to a busy road, and we would only hear cars and trucks day and night. Complaining for the sake of complaining is what I used to think. Anyway, at this point, I was fed up of renting, and I was very close to telling him he could stay in Quebec and I would move on my own. And I looked at him and I said, you know, this is all I can afford. And this is the house that I'm buying for myself. If you want to come along, you're welcome. But if you don't think you're going to be happy there, that's okay too. When he realized that I was basically telling him that I didn't care about his complaints anymore, he relented and he looked through the realtor photos and he made some nice comments about the place. But he also said, this is a starter home, I guess. Once we're there, we can find a place that's a lot more remote. That kind of went in one ear and out the other for me because I knew I wouldn't be able to afford to buy another house. He wasn't contributing anything financially, and I was really buying the house for me. This was very clear, and he was okay with it. He said he didn't want the responsibility of a mortgage, and he was happy to just live with me in my house. Of course, I told him I would like it to be our house, that when we got there, we do renovations together, we fix the place up together, we make the place our home. Of course, there were promises, but they were all false promises of helping out. Throughout the 5 years that he lived here with me, he complained continually that it wasn't remote enough for us. He didn't want to see anybody. He was really trying to isolate me so that I wouldn't have any contact with any person. He wanted us to live together in a little cottage in the middle of the woods, no electricity, living off the grid, growing our own food. If we needed to order things, send it to a P.O. box, never speak to anyone ever. And it kind of sounded appealing to me, but only because I imagined it was a life where we would be happy and that there would be no abuse. And I can only imagine if I had gone along with that, how trapped I would have been, physically speaking, dealing and tolerating with his abuse. So that's my example, and I can give you another example that I read as I did my research. There was a particularly awful story that I read about one person who was disabled and relied on their partner for all of their needs. The partner was abusive, and because the victim had mobility problems, the abusive partner physically isolated them. The abuser locked them into a room. Either the victim was stuck in a bed or stuck in a wheelchair. There was no telephone, there was no computer. This person was physically isolated. I suppose you can think of this as kidnapping in a way as well, right? Holding someone against their own will. The victim spoke out about their partner, saying that they felt completely trapped in that room. But at the same time, they were physically trapped in their own body and they had no way of calling out for help. What eventually happened was they were able to get the window open and to call out to a person just randomly on the street, asking them to call the police. Now that's a very extreme example of physical isolation. Another example of physical isolation could be taking away all forms of communication, internet, landline phones, cell phones. As I mentioned previously, I really like to be alone, though sometimes I come off as very sociable. I'm truly an introvert, and I have very good friends, and they are very much like me. We don't feel the need to meet each other in person and get a coffee or go to each other's houses or call each other on the phone out of the blue. We recognize that we aren't like that. We value our time and our privacy, and in return, we value the other person's time and privacy. So we use a social media platform where we can send each other messages, text messages, and voice messages. We can send videos, and we can schedule a video call if we want to. And this works with our lifestyle. So twice during the last 4 years that we were together before he took his life, my late husband took my phone away from me. He wouldn't give it back. And it was during instances of intense verbal abuse. My intention was to call the police, and he knew that. So he took my phone. After the first time he did it, he gave it back to me rather quickly, and he apologized for the fight. Now, I was able to forgive him under the promise that he would never do that again. My phone really is my lifeline. This is how I communicate with my friends. This is how I would call the police or an ambulance or a neighbor. Now, the second time he took it away from me, he refused to give it back. I remember the feeling of being so panicked, so trapped physically in this house because it happened during the middle of the night and I had no way to call for help. Taking someone's lifeline away, the only way that they have to communicate with anyone, is a form of physical isolation. You're basically trapping that person in the house and they can't call for help. Now, granted, had I not taken my phone back at some point during that night, I would have been out at first light with the dogs running to the neighbor's house, but I was able to take it back from him. And that night I did call the police. Now, that's a whole other story, but that's another example of physical isolation. And just to note, after that happened, not long after, I purchased a second phone with a different phone number. And that one was locked away in my drawer for any emergency. Now, some other ways that abusers can physically isolate their victims is by taking away the car keys or hiding the wallet or not allowing them to have their identification handy. The abuser could monitor their partner's movements, always insist on being right with their partner wherever they go. This is physically isolating because you feel trapped and you feel chained to your partner. You don't have the freedom to speak your mind. And of course, I am talking about abusive relationships here. So all of these examples of physical isolation are in abusive relationships. Now, another way to isolate a victim is emotionally. The purpose of isolation in an abusive relationship is to take away any source of support or encouragement or validation from the victim. By cutting off their support system, the abuser becomes the only source of emotional and physical support. This is true in the case of physical isolation, and it's also true in the case of emotional isolation. But emotional isolation can happen in a tricky and manipulative way, slowly and covertly over time. I think that the goal of emotional isolation is to manipulate a person through their own feelings so that that person will somehow make the decision on their own to isolate themselves in the relationship. And I'm not victim blaming here. I'm just saying how covert this is, how manipulative it is. In a way, I suppose it's gaslighting. It's convincing the victim through words and criticisms and accusations into believing that they're better off not communicating with anyone but their abusive partner. It's brainwashing. Some ways that an abuser can do this is by belittling or insulting their friends or family. They may criticize or make fun of their partner's social media connections. They may shame them because they have friendships through social media. I really hate to say this, but I've experienced all of this. Just before his first suicide threat in 2024, my late husband told me that he was receiving hate emails from two of my friends. I didn't believe him, but he tried. I called him on it and I said, "Show me the emails." He said, "No, I deleted them." And that's when I told him I didn't believe him, but he tried very hard to convince me that it was true, using some of the information that he knew about these two friends against me. I had spoken about them casually with him at some times, and it's like he kept that data bank information in his head to use against me at some point. Now, this may not be true, but that's how it felt. He also made fun of me for having social media accounts. I thought it was fun, and I met wonderful people that way, and it kept me connected to the world outside. But he tried to shame me by saying, "You used to be the type of person who laughed at social media, and look at you now." Okay, it's true that I did laugh at Twitter at some point because I couldn't understand the value of it. Why did people use it? I still don't. But when I discovered other platforms where I found some very nice people, I didn't feel so alone. And this is probably where he felt threatened. By sowing the seeds of doubt or mistrust, an abusive person makes the victim question whether or not they can really rely on their friends and family. This manipulation will strengthen the abuser's control and make the victim feel more dependent on the abuser. This keeps their partner isolated from people who could potentially be helping them. More subtle ways of manipulating a person into emotional isolation could be saying things like, we need to spend more time together. We need to spend more alone time together. It may start off in a very romantic and cute way, or, something like, oh, you don't have to go see your buddies tonight. Spend the night with me. And as time goes by, these cute little requests could turn into emotionally charged demands, discouraging their partner from spending time with their friends and their family. In 2024, I had plans to meet a fellow blogger and her husband. This is when my late husband threatened suicide for the first time. Now, the whole thing exploded just about an hour before I was meant to leave the house to meet these people. I was stuck. My logical mind was saying, he's threatening it to manipulate you, just go. But my heart was saying, he's going to do something to hurt himself, and I can't live with that guilt. In the end, he did do something. I got him help, and I still went to visit my friends, but I was distracted and I felt anxious the entire time. Another way of sowing the seeds of doubt into a victim is saying things like, I'm just protecting you. I trust you, but I don't trust them. I'm worried that they don't have your best interests in mind. This is manipulation that's disguised as concern. You may hear things like, your friends are a little bit of a bad influence on you. Stay home with me. Work is stressing you out so much. Why don't you quit? I'll support us. Oh, you don't need anyone but me. We're soulmates. At first, you might be flattered. You might stop answering your phone. You might cancel plans with your friends. You might not show up at family dinners. You may even quit your job. You're made to feel that you are so important and valued by your partner because they want to spend all of their time with you and take care of you. This is all part of love bombing as well. They bomb you with all sorts of love and attention, but it never lasts. In a case like emotional isolation, they're manipulating you with love bombing to make you think that you don't need anyone else but them, that you don't want to be with anyone else but them, because you feel so great around them. But as time goes by, you will notice that your partner's desire to spend time with you will gradually decrease. The neglect will begin. When you feel so alone during this gradual decrease of attention and love, your self-worth takes a hit. You may feel embarrassed that you were ignoring your friends and your family over your partner. You may feel ashamed, so you don't contact anyone. Though you've been manipulated, it may feel like you purposely isolated yourself from everyone. Here are some other things you might hear when your partner is trying to emotionally isolate you. Why are you always texting them? Why do you need to be a social butterfly? Aren't I enough for you? Hearing these things makes you feel defensive. It makes you feel like you need to justify your basic need for contact with other people. I remember when I used to go to the grocery store. I always went alone. He never wanted to come with me because he had social anxiety. And there was one instance where there was a guy who flirted with me at one of these grocery stores. It made me feel good. It made me feel happy. And when I got home, I told my late husband, I said, guess what? I've still got it. He asked me what I meant. And I told him I got flirted with. He did not like that. I tried to tell him that it was just someone flirting with me. I didn't flirt back. I wasn't trying to cheat on him. But there was no convincing him. So whenever I would get ready to go grocery shopping, after that he would always say, who are you dressing up for? It was an attempt to make me feel like I was secretly trying to attract other men behind his back. It's not like I was wearing a prom dress or a Kentucky Derby hat. I just dressed nice to go out of the house, but instead of complimenting me for looking nice, he passively aggressively tried to shame me for looking nice. I suppose ideally he would want me to look like a mess when I went out so that I wouldn't be flirted with. There are other ways to try to emotionally isolate someone. One involves embarrassing the victim in social settings to discourage them from attending those social settings. The abuser could create conflict or discomfort so that the victim will avoid these social situations altogether. My late husband attempted to do this with other people. When somebody came to the house to do a repair or to give me an estimate for a repair, my husband would be downright rude to them. He didn't want anyone coming to the house. There was a time when a plumber came into the house to look at the pressure tank for my well. We were just having a nice, friendly conversation when my husband walked into the room, inside of the house wearing sunglasses. He glared at the plumber, didn't say a word, took his hand and he put it on my shoulder and he pulled me close to him like that. I was mortified. Another time he called an electrician a jerk. These type of things happen so often. Anytime a neighbor would come near the house, he would just glare at them and not say a word to them. He was trying to intimidate people to not come to the house, but at the same time humiliate me into not wanting these people to come back. And just on a side note, this fall, I'm going to face one of my fears. I'm going to call that electrician that my late husband called a jerk. And I'm going to ask him if he will come and fix my dryer. I don't know how he's going to react, but he is a great electrician and I hope it goes well. Wish me luck on that one, friends. Another way is to keep their victims busy. If the victim is super busy, overwhelmed with kids and household responsibilities, then the abuser knows that their partner is likely to be too tired to have outside connections or to even leave the house. Using threats to force the victim into isolation is another way. And as I mentioned in many of my videos and in this one, my late husband had suicide ideation and he often threatened suicide. I think this was the last card that he could play with me and it worked for a few years. I stayed at home with him. I stayed away from the things that I wanted to do, from the people that I wanted to spend time with. After a while, I had to tell myself, despite the consequences, I had to put my own safety and happiness first. It was an excruciating decision for me because deep down inside, I knew he would follow through, and he did. And finally, if the abuser's partner resists their attempt to isolate them, the abuser will often lash out. They will basically punish their partner for defying them. They may take out their anger on them. In my case, I was given the silent treatment for days or weeks, and he retaliated by making life very difficult. There could be escalated physical violence as well. Abusers do not like when their victims stand up to them, and if this punishment makes enough impact on the victim will probably choose isolation over resisting the isolation. And again, it's all about control. It's about manipulating the person into doing what the abuser wants them to do. Isolation is an intentional attempt by the abusers to ensnare their partner, to make them feel powerless and disconnected and unable to leave. After time, these tactics create a situation where the victim feels dependent on the abuser, not just for physical and financial care, but emotional care as well. The dependency traps the victim into the abusive relationship, making it very difficult to reach out for help or to escape the cycle of abuse. The increased dependency gives the abuser more power and influence over you. As your self-worth, self-esteem, and your confidence slowly deteriorates, you feel broken down, you're emotionally drained, and in a state of mind, usually you're less inclined to resist your abusive partner's attempt to isolate you in this state of mind. So you tolerate it and you give in. Your world becomes smaller and leaving is impossible. You have to remember that abusive relationships thrive in silence. And when the victim doesn't feel confident or safe enough to expose the abuse, adding to that they're isolated from their support system, it's a very strong tool used by abusive people, and it works. Please just remember that you can always try to reconnect with your support system. You deserve a life free from abuse, surrounded by people who love you and want to see you shine. By speaking, by breaking the silence, and trust me, I know it's easier said than done. It takes strength, and though it's challenging, it's worth thinking about for your safety and your own well-being. So, my friends, that is the 7th reason why we stay in these abusive relationships, due to isolation. The effects of isolation run very deep because it destroys the victim's self-esteem, confidence, and their self-worth. It can also lead to feelings of shame, humiliation, and helplessness. Victims of isolation become increasingly reliant on their abuser, making it incredibly difficult to break free from the cycle of abuse. In my next video, in this series that will be coming out next week, I'll discuss dismissive behavior as a reason why we stay in intimate partner relationships that are abusive. Until then, my friends, thank you so much for being here. Please be well, and I'll see you next time. Bye.